Very good to be here today on behalf of Conservative Voice with the Right Honourable Damian MP, who's a board member of Britain Stronger in Europe. And Damian, thank you very much for your time today. I wondered if you could kick off by telling us a bit about Britain Stronger in Europe and also why you're involved in the campaign.
Britain Stronger in Europe is the umbrella campaign we expect to be designated by the Electoral Commission the official campaign to remain in. It's a cross-party campaign which not just covers all the major political parties, the UK-wide political parties, from us, from the Conservatives, through to the Greens. Caroline Lucas is also on the board with Labour and Lib Dems on as well, but also, almost more importantly, bringing together groups from across society. So it's chaired by a businessman, Stuart Rose, who used to run Marks and Spencer, who, as it happens, is a Conservative, but we've got people on it like Vice Chancellors. We've got a lot of input from civil society, from people around the country. We've got the President of the National Union of Students on it. So both politically and in terms of who the people on that board represent, it's very widespread. Why I'm involved? Because I think that straightforwardly Britain is stronger inside the European Union. I think economically it's better for us. I think it gives us a stronger voice in the world. So as what you would expect a normal patriotic Conservative, I think Britain's influence in the world is increased by being a member of the European Union, and that's why I'm involved in the campaign.
And how key do you think it is that we reform the relationship that we have with Europe? And the Prime Minister's renegotiations have obviously been met with sort of mixed responses. They're quite different to what he set out originally in his Bloomberg speech. Are you happy with what he's putting forward to European colleagues, or would you have liked him to have been a bit more in keeping with his original statements a couple of years ago, for example?
Well, I do think the European Union, like any institution, needs reform. I think Britain has a particular relationship with the European Union, which is already shown in the fact that we're not part of the Schengen free border zone. Obviously, we're not a member of the Euro and won't be. And so actually crystallising what that means and both helping Europe reform itself in terms of the competitiveness agenda that the Prime Minister wants, and also making clear that countries like Britain that aren't in the Euro and don't plan to join the Euro need to be treated entirely fairly within the single market. I think those are absolutely crucial for the future success of Britain's membership of the European Union. So absolutely, I welcome the reform agenda that the Prime Minister has put forward. And I think the fact that, when at the time we're doing this interview, it's, there are squalls and there are difficulties with the negotiations, shows that actually these are serious and difficult issues that he's addressing. People have said, oh, it's all fairly trivial stuff. I don't think it is. I think, as I say, making sure that a country outside the Eurozone has fair treatment. I think that the competitiveness agenda is very important. I think giving a better role to national parliaments is particularly important. And also making it clear that in as much as ever closer union means a move towards a federal European state, that Britain doesn't want to do that, and will make it clear that as a pro-European I'm completely comfortable with all of that.
I know that you've obviously touched on the economic benefits of remaining in the European Union. It's something that you've written about before. I know you wrote an article for Colin Home recently. The Vote Leave campaign argues that we spend £350 million a week on Europe. Every family would be sort of better off to the tune of just under £1,000 per annum if we were to leave. How confident are you that Britain would be better off to remain part of the European Union? And also, why would you assert that we wouldn't be able to retain economic ties with the European Union should we choose to leave the political aspects of it?
Well, in order of those questions, that 350 million is of course a gross figure, not a net figure. We get money back from the European Union as well, so that figure's a bit dodgy. And the thing that those on the other side of the argument don't take into account is the extra investment and dynamism in the British economy, best illustrated by the car industry. 700,000 people work in the car industry. It's one of the huge historic successes, actually, of the Thatcher era as much as anything. Britain, the car industry in the 1970s was a basket case. It's now world leading. Famously, one of the Nissan plants in the northeast of England is their most productive plant in the world. That would have been unthinkable 30 years ago. But what we need to recognise is that all those big international companies that have set up car plants in this country are doing so not to sell to Britain, but to sell to the whole of Europe. And, you know, would they all close down the day after we left? No, of course they wouldn't. But that next engine plant you'd want in 3 years' time, that next supply chain that small firms would depend on, would that be more likely to go to Britain, or would it be more likely to go to somewhere inside the single market? Common sense suggests that businesses which are risk averse, particularly big international businesses, are not going to say, let's take the safe option, let's put it inside the single market that we want to be inside. Now, the other half of your question was, well, couldn't Britain just replicate the free trade deal that we got as being a member outside? Well, first of all, you can't guarantee that at all. It's a huge risk to think you could do that. And all you can then do is look at the other countries that are, you know, part of the European landmass but not part of the European Union, and you observe that, you know, Norway has to pay a fee to get access to the single market, and there is this very, very stark fact that those who want us to leave, you know, can't address, which is that if you do that, and if you want to sell cars to the European Union, you're going to have to meet emission standards, technical standards and so on. You're going to have no say in setting those standards, but you're still going to have to obey them. So that puts British industry and British exporters in a weaker position than they are now. They will just get standards dictated by someone else, which they will have to meet. And that can't be in the interests of jobs or long-term prosperity in this country.
The other thing that I think is really kind of a very hot topic on people's minds at the moment is the issue of security, people feeling safe. And I know that, again, you've written that we are safer as part of the European Union. By extension, would you be happy to see us form part of a unified European army, have a common foreign policy? I know there's been talk as well of the European Spy Agency and things of this nature. Would you like us to be a part of that, or stay on the outside of those sorts of things?
I don't see the point of a European army. I don't think that's a particularly realistic prospect, certainly not for Britain being part of it. But the practical cooperation we have, I think, is important. I think the European arrest warrant, which has been controversial, and it's not me particularly saying it, it is our security agencies and our police saying that's extremely useful, particularly, I mean, as we had the famous case of one of the would-be terrorists on the 21st of July, the bombs that happily didn't go off, fled to Italy and was brought back here quite quickly. That's great. The Parliament has just passed overwhelmingly by 503 votes to 24 that we should opt into measures that allow the sharing of DNA information about convicted criminals inside a system that the European Union has set up. And that's a really interesting practical example, because of course we can share it through Interpol, of course there are other ways of doing it, but that's really slow. There isn't a mechanism for doing it. Because there is this European mechanism for doing it, and I mean a practical mechanism, instead of taking months, as it sometimes does now to get the information back, it will take 15 minutes. And if you've got a fast-moving police investigation, particularly, God help us if it's after a terrorist incident or something like that, that speed is really important. So just in practical terms of making our streets safer, it seems to me those are the sorts of things where the European Union has set up a good system. It's a good idea for Britain to join it, and as I say, Parliament agreed overwhelmingly a few days ago that we should do that.
And Parliament agreeing legislation for this country is obviously key, and I think sovereignty has been another issue of contention, and something that Vote Leave and other campaign groups have sort of wanted us to gain much more control over. I think I'm correct in saying 72 motions put before the European Council were opposed by the UK, none of them were upheld. Does that sit comfortably with you? How do you feel about the pooled sovereignty arrangement that we have with the EU, and would you want to see more powers brought back to our domestic parliament?
I want to give Parliament, in practical terms, more influence, absolutely, and the proposal for a group of parliaments across, I mean, you can argue about whether the number, how many it should be that should be able to stop a measure, but that kind of thing seems to me sensible. Just to say, okay, well, the British Parliament can stop something happening. Well, obviously, if we have that power, then the French would, other countries would as well. And you can absolutely guarantee at that point that Europe would become less open, less liberal, less in favour of free trade, all the things that we benefit from particularly, we would over time lose. So I don't think that's a practical option, and indeed those proposing it want us to pull out. They know that if you just say you can have an absolute veto in an institution that has 28 members, then frankly nothing would happen. So I think that the practical effects of making proposals to have a group of national parliaments to have more power is perfectly sensible.
As a former Minister of State for Immigration, it'd be a bit remiss of me not to bring up immigration with you. There seems to be quite a bit of disagreement on the issue. I know that Lord Rose has said before that EU migration to the UK hasn't been detrimental to our country. Vote Leave have called for a more open system. They feel that we're discriminating against others throughout the world. And I know that the Prime Minister said yesterday that he feels that the current situation is just unsustainable for the UK. Where do you sit on this? How would you like to see us take forward migration with the EU?
I think the first point is that the vast majority of people who come here from the EU come here to work. I think that what really offends people is the thought of people coming here and claiming benefits from day one. And there is an aspect of that, and that's one of the elements of the renegotiation that I think is quite important. For instance, these people who can send child benefit to children who've never set foot in this country, there is something wrong with that, and I think that ought to be relatively easy to agree, because other countries will think that's unfair as well. Universal credit solves some of the problems, because particularly for out-of-work benefits, they won't be available to people who just took up here from another European country. There is clearly a negotiation to be had about in-work benefits, and that will be a tough negotiation, but that's what the Prime Minister is doing now. On the issue of numbers, I agree with the Prime Minister that my experience as Immigration Minister tells me that those who say, oh, it shouldn't just be a numbers game, I'm afraid it is a numbers game to some extent, because Britain is clearly an open, trading, tolerant global society with all our history. We're quite good, when you look around the world, at both absorbing people from different cultures and actually benefiting from it. And that famous old Robin Cook joke about Britain's national dish is chicken tikka masala. There is an underlying truth in that. We are a very different society from the way we were 50 years ago, and yet we're still very recognisably British, so we can do that. But you can only do that if the numbers are at a level that you can cope with. If they're too big, then people do start feeling insecure, and that's what gives rise to the growth of extremist politics. I mean, it was at its worst now about 10, 15 years ago, when the BNP was really quite strong in places like Barking, and that was due to people feeling society was dislocating around them. So numbers do matter, and the solution at a European level is, first of all, to remove any pull of benefits, which I think you need to do to protect the sort of integrity of the welfare state, and also, in the end, to have proper economic growth in other countries as well. At the time when the Spanish economy and the Italian economy were flat on their back, a huge number of young Italians and Spaniards came here because the British economy was growing faster even during the recession. Now, the fact that the Spanish economy is recovering and so on, the Irish economy recover as well, that some of those Eurozone economies are recovering now, that will have an effect in the medium term on our immigration numbers, because people will be able to find jobs in their own country, and young people in particular will see opportunities there. So in a sense, it's a way we're tied in, that the economic success of our neighbours is extremely important to us.
Just going back to the renegotiation of the Prime Minister, Donald Tusk was reported as saying today that he doesn't think the Prime Minister will be 100% happy with the negotiations once they're concluded. Are there any sort of red lines for you, as it were, that you would ever choose to campaign to vote to leave the European Union, or not so much?
I don't think so. I mean, first of all, you would expect Donald Tusk to say that. I mean, we're in the middle of a negotiation. Nobody says, "Oh, I'm sure you'll be 100% satisfied at the end of it," because at that point we can say, "Thank you very much. You've given us what we've asked for," and that's over. That's not the way negotiations work. But I do think, I mean, stepping back from that, and it's interesting that although we all get obsessed with the details of the negotiation and how successful it's being and so on, in the end there are groups of people, quite large groups of people in this country, who will look at it not just in terms of negotiation, but if you like, in a wider historic sweep. There are those who want to get out and never want to be in the European Union, and others who see the benefits and want to stay in. So no, I can't see myself ever campaigning to get out unless something very, very odd happened to the European Union over the next 10 or 15 years or so. You know, it has imperfections. All institutions have imperfections. It needs to reform. All institutions need constant reform. But on balance, Britain benefits from our membership economically. I think we benefit in terms of our voice in the world, which is amplified. And I think we benefit because in a dangerous world, it makes us safer. It is sensible to be in an organisation with other friendly democracies. So I think there are a number of big historic reasons why Britain benefits from our membership and will continue to do so in the coming years.
Just if there are members, followers of Conservative Voice watching this, the wider public, who are still a bit undecided, they're still not sure how they will vote when that referendum comes about, what would be the one thing that you'd like to leave with them to convince them to back your campaign and vote to stay in the European Union?
I recognise that Britain, despite the terrible recession we went through, is a relatively successful society, and for the last 50 years we've been a member of the European Union. That has helped make us that successful society. And ask yourself, what does outlook look like? Because the weakest point, it seems to me, of the various Leave campaigns is that they can't tell us what the world would be like. That is an enormous risk that they're asking the British people to take. They're asking the British people to leap off a cliff and not knowing what's beyond it. Are we going to be like Norway? Are we going to be like Switzerland? Are we just going to say everything will be okay because we can renegotiate the terms of trade exactly the same as they were now? None of those can be certain. So it is a colossal risk to pull out.
Do you agree? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.